Today, I am joined by David Newman. I am very excited to have you on the podcast, and it's been great because I've read your book. Obviously, I was on your podcast as well, and I've been following you for quite a while. So it's very thrilling for me to have you on the show today, David. Welcome.
It's great to be here, Ken. Thanks for having
And
me.
for those of you that don't know David, he's based out in Pennsylvania, and he is a world-renowned speaker, certified speaker as well. He's written several books. His company is called Do It Marketing, and his books are all about do it marketing, do it selling, do it speaking, and he's just done quite a bit. And his podcast is also fantastic. If you haven't taken a listen yet, I highly recommend it. So thank you for being here today.
Yeah, no, it's fun. It's always nice to flip the microphones the other way, right? Because half the time we're guesting, half the time we're hosting, and it's unusual actually to be on someone's show who has been a guest. So this will be a lot of
That's great. We
fun.
like to mix things up a little bit for you, and it probably will help you kind of get back to the basics and just remember what your guests are going through when you bring them on your show, because now you're on somebody else's show.
Totally.
That's great. Well, I thought, obviously this podcast is all about leadership, and we try to do things differently. And really, rather than just saying, hey, what's the lesson learned about leadership, which is the same old, I like to really kind of delve into each person's, particular background and focus, and how leadership has shaped who you are today, and also how who you are has shaped your leadership style. I thought that our theme for today would be around kind of the fact that leadership is really kind of in the eye of the beholder. And leadership means different things to different people, depending upon the company that you're running and where you come from, and like I said, kind of the role that you have. So let's start, if you don't mind, with how would you define leadership in today's day and age?
Wow, that's a big question. It's funny. I did not actually become a leader until I started my entrepreneurial career. So, working in all of my corporate jobs, I reported to leaders, and I had some good leaders and some not so good leaders, and I guess there were lessons on both halves of that equation. But now, after 20 years of being a leader in my own business, I would define leadership as someone who uh, sees some purpose, sees some north star, some vision, some destination, and blazes the trail to get there, and then invites others along on the journey. So I always look at it as a voluntary. This is a volunteer army. There's no draft. You can't force someone to be a follower. And I know that in the big corporate structures, of course, there is some top down command and control leadership styles that are still out there. That's never been my cup of tea. So I do believe in the volunteer army. And Ken, I think you probably saw this in some of your prep, but my academic background is in theater. So I have an undergraduate degree in drama. I have a graduate degree. I have an MFA in stage directing. And stage directing is a fantastic metaphor for leadership because you've got the actors, you've got the lighting designer, the scene designer, the costume designer, all of the stage management, the literary manager. If it's a contemporary play, you've got the playwright sitting right there next to you as you're directing their work. And all of that needs to be collaborative. And it's about winning buy-in, painting a picture of a shared destination or a shared vision, and frankly, making it fun, making the journey fun along the way. I always say that in anything, marketing related, sales related, leadership related, if it's not fun, you're probably doing it wrong. So that would be my extended definition of leadership.
I love that. Yeah, to that point, one of our most recent guests also, we had talked about his focus was on, making sure that you're not in a career that's soul crushing. as he called it. And to your point, right, it's the flip side of if it's not fun, it's going to just suck all your energy and your excitement and just your desire to even just be there on a day-to-day basis. And you've got to make sure that you're doing something fun. And if you're showcasing, I think, your ability to have fun, then it makes it more fun for the team that does decide, that does choose to follow you. And they see that, hey, it can be a great experience to be in a leadership role. Let's do what David is asking us to do. He's having fun, and we can have fun along the way.
Yes, absolutely. I completely agree.
Yeah, and I always think about, so as far as my background goes, I always thought of entrepreneurship and leadership less around being a title, right? And more around a peace of mind and a frame of mind. Right. It gives you that peace of mind to know, okay, I have the ability to lead people, to impact somebody else out there. But it's also a frame of mind because you may not be leading a team. You might be a teacher, you might be a warehouse manager, you could be an engineer or a software developer, or you might be a CEO. But in all those roles, you are impacting the people around you. And that impact, in my view, is what leadership is all about.
I totally agree. And Ken, this conversation reminds me, I'm just jotting down some notes here because this totally reminded me of a parenting metaphor or the parenting advice that we sometimes get. So I have two kids. They are 30 and 27.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
And so I'm past the point where we can be impressionable upon them. They both turned out great. So we're
Well
lucky
done,
with
well done.
that.
Kudos to you.
But when you have young children, the saying is, don't be worried that your kids don't always listen to you. Be worried that your kids are always watching you. So as a leader, we have this, and this only occurred to me, like I would say, in the last 10 years. It's fairly obvious to some of our folks listening, I'm sure. But your mood, your words, the things that you say, sometimes even if you're on a Zoom meeting or an in-person meeting, your facial gestures. Uh-oh, she's not happy. Uh-oh, he doesn't like that. Uh-oh, he doesn't like me. Uh-oh, Ken's a little bit grumpy today. They will take the smallest clue, the smallest hint. If we were playing poker, we would say the smallest tell, and they would read so much into it. So not only do we have to be very, very careful about our intentional leadership and our intentional signals, we have to be incredibly careful with our unintentional signals. And sometimes, literally, the words that we use, the emotions that we convey, happy, sad, grumpy, upset, disappointed, irritated. I think one of the key leadership mantras that I try and live by is not so much even managing the team, because if you pick great people, they're somewhat self-managing, but managing your own attitude, managing your mindset, managing your come from, managing, especially when things get tough, they want to see a leader who is balanced, who is level-headed, who does not freak out, does not have a temper tantrum, does not panic, does not melt down, does not get enraged. And so no matter what your native personality, I think you have to put a leadership lens, and this is in the best possible way. It's not about having a mask necessarily, but it's about being very intentional about what you're broadcasting to the world. I mean, your internal team, your clients, your customers, your vendors, your partners, everybody. You need to be steady hand on the wheel, emotional mastery, emotional intelligence, starting with your own, mastering your own emotional turbulence or upset or disappointment or anger or businesses not going the way you want, profits are not going the way you want, difficult customer conversation, you just had to fire a client, whatever it may be. We need to have a level of emotional mastery that coming into this, I never imagined. In fact, I probably thought the opposite. I was like, Ken, I'm going to be authentic. When I'm mad, I'm going to let the team know I'm mad. when I'm disappointed, I'm going to let the team know I'm disappointed. And there are times for that, I have found. But it's probably 20% of the times that you think, or at least it's 20% of the times that I thought. And this mastering your own emotions, mastering your own level of optimism, practical optimism, if you will, wink, wink, nudge,
Thank
nudge.
you, thank you.
We really have to manage that on a minute to minute, day to day basis. Otherwise, the team will think that there's some crazy person in charge, even though you think you're being authentic, you think you're being human and vulnerable. They're seeing some instability, they're getting nervous, they're getting worried. So I know I've screwed this up when we have like a leadership team meeting. The meeting ends, and one of my leadership team sends me a message. Hey, are you okay? You didn't seem yourself on that meeting. And I was like,
I'm
uh-oh,
laughing. I'm laughing because
uh-oh.
I have been there before as well. I know what you're talking about.
So that's a huge piece of my learning around this.
I love that. Well, and it's, I mean, that cliche of, the tone at the top is so true. And that's usually, it usually refers to, as the leader of the company, what you convey, right? What you prioritize, that really informs how the rest of your employee base operates and what they see as their own priorities. But to your point, it's one thing for that tone at the top to come from your words, but all the other intangibles that you just talked about, your body language, the actual tone of your voice, your eye contact, how engaging are you? If you're known as somebody who likes to give a lot of examples and you are in a meeting and you're giving nothing, no examples at all, there's something that's going to tip your employees off that something's not right. And then you end up with that email afterwards, hey, are you okay? You didn't seem yourself. So we've got to be really aware of that. Let me ask you this, and I'm really curious. So, I'm not sure what the makeup of your team is. I know you have about 10, 11 or so people. I've got a team of 7, so we're both in a similar setting. But depending upon the demographics and really kind of the age, right, and generation of your workforce, that will dictate how you communicate with them and how transparent you are, what they're expecting of you, and your the kind of their ability to filter through what you're saying and what you're conveying. So do you have to adjust your leadership communication style based on who on your team you're talking to, given that makeup?
I think I do. Now, I'm not sure if so in theory, absolutely, of course you do. I'm trying to go back to my own performance in this area, and I, I'm aware of the need to flex based on the personality style, the generations, all of those different factors. Do I do a good job of that? Probably not as good as I should. Uh, I mean, I'm totally sensitive to it. And I think the other leadership skill is self awareness. So when you're talking to someone, for example, let's say you have a one on one with one of your team, and maybe it's a newer team member or someone that you don't know as intimately as some of the other folks on your team. If something's not landing, if their body language is a little bit stiff or a little bit guarded, you can kind of see there's some shields up, and you don't address that, I think that's a huge, huge shortcoming. I think this is true in sales also, of course. So in a sales conversation, for example, when you're talking to a prospect, you notice there's some awkwardness or there's some guardedness or there's some shields. You say, hey, Ken, can I just interrupt real quick? You seem a little bit guarded or just a little bit, on the defensive. I have to apologize. Is it something that I said or something that I did? Because I would not want you to feel awkward or strange during this conversation. And then sometimes just calling it out, they're like, oh, good, okay, he's a human
Right,
being.
right. It
He can
disarms
act, he's
them.
actually sensitive to what's going on in front of his very eyes. And it's not like we're watching TV, like, hey, hello, anybody home? I'm a human being on this side of the Zoom call. And I think this happens worse, of course, in Zoom. It's a little bit more manageable when we're in person. But I think self-awareness is key. And then also being self-deprecating. And then, like in my example that I just gave, being willing to apologize for essentially nothing at all. Like, you didn't do anything wrong, but you're taking the bullet and you're saying, hey, listen, I realize that we're having a little bit of a communications issue here. You seem a little bit guarded. You seem a little bit, standoffish. I have to apologize. If it was something that I did or something that I said, I would never want our relationship to go in this direction. Please forgive me, or can you tell me kind of what I did that is putting you off in that way? I call this the conversation about the conversation. So whether we're talking to one of our team, whether we're talking to a peer or a colleague, whether we're talking to a current client or a prospect, being emotionally aware of what's going on their end of the conversation, and then being willing to address it. So don't just have this little thought in your head, gosh, Ken seems kind of reserved. Ken seems a little bit cold today. This wasn't how our last conversation with Ken went. I wonder what's wrong with Ken. Keeping that in my head is not helping us. So having the conversation about the conversation, I think that is a huge leadership skill, and I think it's a huge sales skill.
I couldn't agree more. And for me, it comes back to vulnerability, right? And I think the kind of subcomponents of vulnerability in my book are what you talked about, is that being self-deprecating and having that self-awareness also. But if you're willing to put it out there, and as a leader, you're expected to. You're setting the tone, right? You are setting the way that your team is going to operate. And if you're showing them that you're willing to be vulnerable and admit mistakes, even when maybe the mistakes aren't really mistakes, to your point, but you're willing to acknowledge that and take ownership for it and have that accountability, that just sets an amazing tone. And then I'm always amazed by how vulnerable my team or even other colleagues outside of my company are willing to be once they've seen me kind of take the lead in that and be the first one to step forward and say, hey, I'm going to be vulnerable here. Let me ask you this question. I'm sorry. Did I do something wrong? Did I say something that was off-putting? And then they're willing to really have a more real human conversation without question. One of the things that kind of sticks in my mind or kind of jumps out to me as a follow-on to this is that you and I both have relatively smaller teams, and I'm willing to bet, just based on your personality and how you lead and how you write your books and how you speak, that you've got a pretty strong relationship with your team, as I do as well, which I think is a double-edged sword. It's great because I feel very connected to all of my team members. I know their spouses' names, I know their kids' names, I know their birthdays, all these different things. And I'm talking about things that are personal and not just business related. The flip side of that is that when accountability comes into play, or someone does something wrong, or you have to make a structural change in the organization, that human connection, that personal relationship can sometimes get in the way. Have you had do you have any suggestions or methods that you use to kind of keep the personal David separate from the CEO David?
Yes. So it's a couple of things. I think there's two common workplace metaphors. One is, hey, we're a family, and the other is, hey, we're a team, like a sports team. I don't like the family metaphor because you don't fire your family. You don't reprimand. Well, sometimes you do, and maybe sometimes you should. But there's all kinds of things that are kind of taboo with family that make perfect sense when you're on a team. So the whole, oh, this is great, it's my work family. I'm like, it's not your work family. You have your work and your team, and then you have your family and over here. So to me, there is, and of course, you can have a very close-knit team. You can have a championship team. You can have an amazing team that loves and respects each other's work and goes above and beyond to support each other and cover for each other. And, it really is an amazing teamwork machinery that you can build. But I think when it comes to performance, when it comes to feedback, when it comes to, like you're saying, reorganizing, upsizing, downsizing, job shifting, at the end of the day, it is a team. Teams recruit new players. Teams lose other players. Sometimes teams have to fire players or even fire coaches, right? Fire among the leadership team. And all of that is in the spirit of serving the team's goals. So I think, I make it sound very cold and heartless and clinical. letting people go is never ever fun. It's never ever to be taken lightly. But at the end, I think every manager, every leader listening can relate to this. After you've made a necessary change, whatever that may be, there's this overwhelming sense of relief. And sometimes you even say, boy, I wish I had done this sooner. I wish I had hired that new person sooner. I wish I had recruited that new executive sooner. I wish I had made that personnel change sooner. Joe goes to sales and Wendy comes to marketing. Sometimes it's, I wish I had let that underperformer go sooner. And no matter what it is, I think if we keep that team metaphor first and foremost above the family metaphor, it'll be clear what's good for the team. What do you need to have a winning season? What do you need to get to the quote-unquote championship using that sports metaphor? And it's not, it's not something to be taken lightly or easily, but it's also not something that you can avoid if you're going to be an effective leader.
Yeah, that distinction between family versus team, I think, is a great perspective and a really good realization to call out there. And people feel like I have to call it a family. I have to. There's this kind of a sense of obligation almost that if I don't use that term, then they're going to think I'm just this cold, heartless leader, which is not the case by any stretch of the imagination. You can have a good, strong team, but a family is a different kind of dynamic. I had a great mentor once that told me, Ken, as I started my business 16 years ago, his advice was make sure that you're always talking about the business when you're making decisions, good or bad, rather than you as Ken. So if you're giving somebody a bonus or if you're laying somebody off, it should be the same language. The business is going to provide this. The business is able to pay you a bonus. Or on the flip side, the business really needs to restructure. And this is what we as a business are going to do. So you kind of remove the personal side. Yes, it's me as the small business owner making the decision, but it's what the business needs. And we have to be fair to the business, to our customers, to our stakeholders, all the folks that are out there as well. Without that, it's not going to operate well. And then there won't even be a business if you're not doing it correctly. Just a quick reminder
Yes.
to our audience out there, I'm very excited to have David here with us. David Newman is the CEO and founder of Do It Marketing and all the great things that he does out there with podcasts and writing books and those kinds of things. So it's very, very wonderful to have you here today. I want to switch gears a little bit from the idea of leadership to the idea of thought leadership. Right? Because all the things that you do over the last 22 years of your business, right, is really, if you look at it, in that category of thought leadership. However, thought leadership is such an overused word in a lot of ways, but you've done a great job of really carving out a niche where I truly look at your content as that thought leadership and the way it's supposed to be. Can you share with us kind of how you differentiate and kind of what you look to as being that thought leader in the marketplace?
Sure. Well, I think there's also, so you're totally right, by the way, about the kind of thought leader and thought leadership term being so bandied about and so devalued these days. It's almost like thought leadership marketing, and that's really kind of my specialty, thought leadership marketing, thought leadership selling, sales effectiveness for thought leadership based companies. Thought leadership marketing is really the only kind of marketing that's left. So we can almost dispose of the term thought leadership and just call it marketing. So by that I mean, almost every product, every service has been commoditized to some degree. It is and this has to do with leadership, of course, as well. So I'm glad we're tying these two together. People follow folks that have a perspective, an opinion, a bias, a rant, if you will, or a manifesto, something to believe in, right? So think about the classic Joseph Campbell hero's journey, right? There's the hero and there's the villain. And there's good guys and there's bad guys. The good guys are in the white hats and the bad guys are in the black hats. So sometimes even articulating your manifesto, what's right with the world, what's wrong with the world, what are some common misconceptions, what are some mistakes that too many people are making in your market, your prospects, your clients, your customers, in your fishing pond where you like to operate. And be that leadership voice that says, no, no, don't go over there. Come over here. The water's fine. Hop in. It's not as hard as it looks. Let me show you what's really going on. And having an emotional connection with your audience and with your marketplace. So it's sort of an emotional temperature of when you're marketing or when you're selling or just even when you're interacting with existing clients. They leave that Zoom call, they leave that in-person meeting, they leave that event that you just hosted. How do they feel? So what are the emotions that every interaction with you and your company and your brand generates? And now when I say you got to be contrarian, you got to put your point of view out there, your bias, your lens, your perspectives, your recommendations, what's right with the world, what's wrong with the world. I can already hear our listeners, Ken, they're going, oh, but that's going to be controversial. That's going to upset some people. That might even piss some people off and they won't like me anymore. Well, my friend Mark Levy, who's a positioning consultant and really quite brilliant at this, he says you want to be like licorice. Not a lot of people like licorice, but the people that like licorice, wow, they like it a lot. And they collect licorice, and they collect all different flavors and kinds of licorice, red and black and orange and honeysuckle and elderberry, and they fly to Sweden and they buy licorice that's only available in Sweden, and then they go to Norway and then they buy the Norwegian licorice, then they go to France and they collect licorice. So yeah, guess what? Some people don't like licorice. But the people who like licorice, they really love licorice. And so in your world, for your market, in your area of expertise or business endeavor, you want to be like licorice. So, my books are full of things that a small segment of the population are going to hate. They're just going to hate them. They're going to hate the books. They're going to hate me for saying those things. And similarly, there are people that read those same exact books and they go, finally, this guy, he gets it. He gets me. This is what I've been saying all these years. So in my Do It Marketing book, for example, the first book that I wrote back in 2013, there's a little chapter called Branding is BS. It's like, oh, David's now going against the branding industry and all the branding consultants are going to hate him. Well, so I put in a very well-reasoned argument of why branding is BS. And 10 years later, Ken, this book came out in 2013, 10 years later, people are still coming up to me, fans, not the haters, but the fans are going, you know that branding is BS? Boy, you totally got me with that. I'm with you 1,000%. In fact, I got burned by a branding firm or a branding consultant or some Yahoo that didn't know, his nose from his where he's sitting on his chair, and I got hosed over by a branding consultant also. So here's the mantra. If you don't risk turning some people off, both as a leader and as a marketer and as a seller, but if you don't risk turning some people off, you will never turn anybody on. And nobody buys vanilla, and nobody follows vanilla. So stop being vanilla.
I love that. I think that should be the title of your next book is, be like licorice, or maybe it's
Be
do
like
it
licorice. Well,
licorice.
that's my friend Mark.
Yeah.
He's going to have to do that because that's his favorite saying.
That's fantastic. That's a great metaphor. I mean, you're really right. I mean, I do a lot of networking. I go to a lot of events, and I know that you do as well. A lot of times as a speaker, and I'm amazed by how often I go to an event. And I've been doing this for 26 years since I first got into the recruiting business. But I go to an event, and you meet an attorney or a CPA or a valuation expert or whoever it might be, and you ask them kind of what they do and how they operate, and they give you such plain vanilla, to use your term, that vanilla response, right? Oh, we're very customer centric and we're very collaborative, all these cliches. You could pull that person out of that conversation and put in somebody else, one of their competitors, and they would have exactly the same language, exactly the same wording, and there's no differentiation. There's no willingness to kind of put a stake in the ground. And to your point, to say, hey, this is what I'm good at. This is my superpower. And this is maybe something more controversial, maybe not, but here's what I stand for. Here's what I believe in. Here's how I run my business. Take it or leave it. It's licorice or it's whatever, right? But you've got to be willing to do that and take those chances. Otherwise, you're really kind of fooling yourself and your clients by just giving them this plain vanilla, same old kind of a support, which is very difficult. I want to ask you this question. So this comes to mind a lot because in the sales and marketing leadership recruiting that we do, quite often we see a client will come to us and they'll say, hey, Ken, we promoted so and so from a sales role. They were our leading salesperson. She was doing a great job, and we moved Sally up into a sales director position, but she's really struggling. Right. Same thing on the marketing side. Yeah. Mark was the fantastic, amazing social media manager. He moved his way up into brand, into this, and now he's our director of marketing. But he's not the best leader that we kind of expected him to be. That transition, right, from being in what I call a very selfish kind of role as an IC, we call them individual contributors, where you're focused on your own clients, your own quota, your own revenue mix, right, those kinds of things. Now moving into a leadership role, that's a very different kind of a mindset. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of training or support or guidance or counsel that's given to these people that are superstars on their own that are now expected to be a superstar leader. It's two very different things. Have you seen or even yourself deployed strategies that have helped people make that transition to leadership?
So yes, 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 and yes, and I'm sort of seeing this from all three sides of the table because a lot of our clients are leadership consultants, leadership speakers, leadership trainers. This idea of taking an individual contributor, promoting them, and figuring, well, they were great at the job, I'm sure they'll be great at leading other people who are doing the job that they used to have. I don't know why that still happens. I mean, this has been happening for 50 years, and it hasn't worked for 50 years. This is like saying, okay, Ken, you're a great swimmer with no training, no preparation, no handbook. We're going to put you on the lifeguard stand because you're a great swimmer. And now, Mrs. Schwarzkopf is in the pool drowning, and you're like, Mrs. Schwarzkopf, oh my gosh, what do I do? You don't know CPR. You don't know how to get her out of the pool without getting punched in the face. You don't know how to get the other people out of the pool. You don't know how to do a mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. You literally have no skills, no experience, no background, and no context to save Mrs. Schwarzkopf's life. Yet somehow, because you're a good swimmer, they made you the lifeguard. It's like, interesting. How about that Red Cross lifeguard certification? How about that big fat binder that they teach the lifeguards how to do all of these things and how not to get punched in the face when people are drowning and panicking? So it's literally the same thing, yet in corporate America, we do this all the time. So my advice would be for the executives that are listening, before you promote that individual contributor to a leadership role again, and roll the dice again to hope that they do a good job with no training, no structure, no context, and no expertise in this, invest in some frontline leadership training. Now, this is not a self-serving piece of advice because I don't do leadership training, right? I'm the marketing and the sales guy. But my clients are the leadership consultants and leadership trainers and leadership mentors that you need, and not investing in leadership, that results in mishires, that results in terrible performance, that results in all sorts of morale problems, culture problems, retention problems, recruiting problems. I mean, Ken, this is firmly in your wheelhouse. I mean, they are literally shooting themselves in the foot when they do this, and it's so easily preventable. Leadership is a learnable skill, just like being a lifeguard is a learnable skill. But you don't teach them, they're not going to be effective. And doing the job is a completely different value proposition than leading others who are doing the job.
I completely agree. That's a really great metaphor. I love that. I haven't used that before, but I'll make sure that I reference you when I use it. But I might use that going forward. You're exactly right.
It is
Yeah.
my gift to you, my friend.
Thank you, thank you. I mean, it seems so common sense, right? It seems like, oh yeah, why would you make a good swimmer the lifeguard? But you're right. I mean, that happens all the time in corporate America, and it comes. We see that with the clients that we are working with. You obviously described it with your own clients as well. It's so common. The thing that always gets me also is that we'll have a client that will engage us and hire us because of the experts that we are in recruiting. They'll say, "Hey, we made some mistakes. Let's make sure we don't do it again." They'll bring us in, and then they'll try to manage our process. They'll try to tell us how to do the recruiting, even though they've already said in the previous breath that they did it miserably and they failed horribly, right? But now they're going to tell us how to do it. It just cracks me up. It's just kind of, again, it's back to that self-awareness that you talked about so well earlier on. They're not getting out of their own way to let the process unfold the way it's supposed to unfold when experts are actually leading the march.
Yes, this reminds me of another thing, and this is an old joke, but it's an auto repair shop, and there's a sign on the wall, and it says, mechanic services $50 an hour. If you watch, $75 an hour. If you talk, $100 an hour. If you offer to help, $150 an hour.
I love that. That's
So
fantastic.
don't watch, don't talk, don't offer to help. The experts are in the house.
Oh, that's great. Is there all these different things that we're talking about today are going to end up on signs or T-shirts at some point? That'd be great. That's a whole new line of business for you, selling all this merch, all the yeah,
Merch. I'm in the merch business
all the
now.
David-isms, which is great. I love
Right.
that. Let's switch gears a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about kind of what you're seeing among your clients out there, because you've been doing this for 22 years. You started your business quite a while ago, right? And the whole world of thought leadership has changed, but so has our attention spans. Right. So writing your books today versus the first one you wrote 10 years ago versus today, the speaking engagements that you do today versus 10 or 20 years ago, even the podcasts and the interviews that you do also that are very different. Have you had to change your approach, your style, whether you call it leadership or just communication in general? Have you changed that? Have you altered that based on our diminishing, attention spans and the amount of noise out there that you're trying to break through?
So the short answer is yes and no. And I guess the true confession here is I've always had a short attention span. So even at the beginning of my business, I had a short attention span. What that simply means is my content is short. My content is bite size. I write short blogs. Most of the emails that we write are fairly short. All of my books are organized into 77 little micro chapters. So I started that with the Do It Marketing book, and I followed that same format with the Do It Speaking book, and I followed the same format with the Do It Selling book. So sometimes when you're talking to consultants and experts and thought leaders, they say, I don't have time to write a book. I'm really busy. I've got a business to run. I've got, 10 employees. I'm running a $3 million firm. I said, oh, you don't have time to write? Well, that's great news because they don't have time to read. So write short, market hard. Write short, market hard. And it's the same thing with videos. My videos rarely go more than 10 minutes. Podcasts are usually around the same length as yours, between 30 and 45 minutes, depending on the fascination factor of the guest. And, I think the speeches you bring up, it used to be easier to kind of give a more traditional one-way data dump keynote. I was accused early on, back in the mid-2000s, of having a fire hose style of keynoting. Now, fast forward to today, 2023, 2024, and beyond, now it's a conversation with the audience. So more often than not, it is literally a dialogue, and it doesn't matter if there's 50 people on Zoom or 1,000 people in a room. It feels like a one-on-one conversation because I engineer the content to feel like a one-on-one conversation. Now you say, well, why would you do that? because you do a data dump, even a 10-minute data dump, forget about a 45-minute data dump, people are on their phones. People are texting. People are on Facebook. People are messaging each other in the conference app going, can you believe this blowhard guy just keeps on talking? And I hate his slides. And where'd he get those glasses? And so I'm literally competing minute for minute. I'm competing for their attention. And we have to make it engaging, interactive, experiential. Those are the best kinds of conference experiences where everyone in the audience feels included, they feel engaged, and it's literally too good for them to start farting around on their phones. So I think this concept of short, engaging, bite-sized, interactive, experiential, the more that we can do that, online, offline, Zoom calls, videos on YouTube, live streams, podcasts, live speeches, meetings that you're hosting with your team or with customers and clients, everything needs to be bite-sized. Everything needs to be consumable, digestible, immediately relevant, immediately valuable, hopefully immediately actionable. I mean, that's why I have this kind of do it brand, because everything is meant to be immediately picked up and used. No theory and no fluff and no extra, nice to have content. And if you start doing that, you will start to attract a following and fans and subscribers and referrals because, short attention span theater rules the day. And I think the more value that we can deliver, the mantra is less but better. We have to do shorter, like espresso shots of value and content in everything that we do. And people get addicted to espresso. So let's make that happen.
And it's funny, as you're talking about that, what comes to mind to me is, again, back to leadership, is that has, I think, also translated into how people coach and lead their teams. What comes to mind specifically is performance reviews, right? Back in the day when you were at PeopleSoft, right, and you were at Towers Perrin, now Towers Watson, you probably had like what I had when I was at Enterprise Rent-A-Car in the early 90s, the once a year annual drudgery of a performance review. It was so pointless. And even at age 22, I knew it was pointless. You'd have all these things. How did you think you did this past year, Ken? Here's how I thought you did. And then my least favorite question, what can I do as your leader, as your superior, to help you be more successful? And, the first couple of years I heard that question, I really put a lot of thought into it. By year three, I realized they don't care what I say. They're not going to implement my suggestions. They're not even probably listening right now, right? And that was before the age of smartphones, but they weren't even listening. So I was like, yeah, no, things are great. Just keep doing what you're doing, right? Until I decided to leave a couple years later. And today, as far as leadership goes and review and employee engagement, we've seen a lot of this change over on the review side from the annual performance review to now what we call career conversations. And to your point of having smaller, bite-sized chunks of discussion, whether it's actually sharing something in a new idea or tip or recommendation, or it's just an engagement opportunity with your staff. How are you doing? How are things tracking for you? I know your mom or your wife or your child was sick last week. How is that going? Has anything changed on your side in terms of your career aspirations? So I think even from the leadership perspective, the need to move our hour-long PowerPoint presentation into a more concise conversation has also happened on the leadership side, which I think is fascinating, and I think it's a welcome change.
Absolutely. And I think it's this cycle of sort of continuous feedback and continuous coaching, much like an airplane goes from New York to London on autopilot with thousands of little corrections along the way. It's not literally set it and forget it and I hope you get to London, but as you're flying 1 degree left, 2 degrees right, 2 degrees left, 1 degree back to the right, and if you don't make those adjustments, you end up in Iceland or Australia or somewhere, but not London.
Right. Somewhere far off the track where you're trying to go
Somewhere
to.
way far off
Yeah,
course.
exactly. All right, before we wrap up here, I have one last question I want to ask you. But before I ask that final question, David, how do people get a hold of you? What's the best way for them to connect and contact you?
So a couple of resources for folks. One is I mentioned about the manifesto, what's right with the world, what's wrong with the world. We actually have the Do It Marketing Manifesto, which is online at doitmarketing.com/manifesto. Everything related to our new book, the Do It Selling book, is available at doitselling.com. There's all kinds of companion resources, tools, downloads, training videos, etc. And then, of course, our podcast is called The Selling Show. That's at doitmarketing.com/podcast.
And that's a great show. I've not only because I was a guest, but also I've listened to so many of your episodes both before I was a guest and since then. So I highly recommend it. That's fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
My last question for you, and I'll give you my example, and then I'll ask you for yours. So I have this kind of phrase I use called radical realizations, right? And it comes to mind because I've had so many either junior recruiters or early stage entrepreneurs, business owners that have asked me, "Hey Ken, what are the things that you wish you could have done differently? What are some tips or tricks that I can share with them, or big surprises that you had about running a business, being a recruiter, and being an entrepreneur?" And so for me, my radical realization is that I really thought I'd have this figured out by now. Right, by year 3, by year 5, even by year 10, right? Here I am at year 16 of running my business, year 26 of being a recruiter, and every year I am still surprised by the fact that what worked last year may not necessarily work this year, and always having to switch things up and adjust my approach to what I do and how we approach the marketplace. So I'm curious for you, what is any radical realization come to mind for you?
Yes, well, and it's also around the entrepreneurial journey and the leadership journey. It's three simple words that anytime that you're stuck, anytime that you feel you've hit a dead end, anytime where you literally do not know what to do or do not know where to turn, the three words are action eliminates fear. So basically, that's do something. Doing anything, even if it's the wrong thing. But doing something gives you data. And then you can course correct, then you can make a different decision, then you can iterate, then you can fine tune. But just sitting at your desk with your head in your hands or paralyzed with fear or paralyzed with doubt, that is not a happy place to be. So obviously, as the do it guy, my radical realization has to be around action, and action eliminates fear.
That's fantastic. What a great mantra. That should definitely be a t-shirt. It applies to so many different things. I would buy that t-shirt in a second. Maybe I'll send you one for Christmas.
We are doing the merch store together,
We're
buddy.
gonna
Come
do it.
on, we got to set this
Our
up.
next endeavor. We're all about it for sure. Well, thank you, David. I really appreciate you. I mean, I appreciate your willingness to be vulnerable and to share the insights and the mistakes that we've both made and insights that you have also, and just really kind of shedding the light and shining a spotlight on what's happening around thought leadership and how you're obviously conducting yourself with your business out there. So thank you for sharing all that and for the great tidbits that you've provided us today.
So great talking with you, Ken. Thank you.